people who are involved. They have one of what I think, hands down, is one of the most superb managers today, which is Alan Valentine, running that organization. And whether Alan realizes or not, he really is the driving force behind a lot of the positive relationships that are within the organization, not just between the musicians and him on the senior level, but that attitude filters down through the rest of his staff. And, of course, that then intermingles with the musicians. For an organization that came from such difficult times of bankruptcy, not that long ago at all, to go to a situation where they're building a $120 million concert hall, and they raised $25 million for their endowment before then, and their musicians, doubled their income in that time as well, too. I mean, that's an extraordinary accomplishment. And in other organizations that have had very similar financial and labor problems who have not been able to recover equally, I think Nashville's a real shining example.
Yeah, at one time Nashville was, I mean, it calls itself Music City, and it was just C&W.
Oh, yes.
And now it's expanded.
Oh, sure, and they still fight that attitude. I published a series of articles about what they're doing at Nashville, and I talked to some people about it, and the first thing they always say is, Nashville? You're kidding. Nashville? This is going on? Isn't that country music? And it is. I was able to spend some time there. And if anything in the business, I'm known for looking for things that may or may not be good in organizations. And I really looked for something beyond what I assumed at first was just a veneer. And I really found nothing but substance there. I found concerns. It doesn't mean there isn't problems within the organization, but there's an amount of inherent respect for one another among musicians and managers and between one another that allows them to work through those problems, so it's not something else that just adds to the apathy that tends to tear away organizations from the inside out.
Earlier you talked about the music director or the conductor as being a little island sometimes unto him or herself, we'll say. How's that, what's the situation in Nashville?
Well, in Nashville, of course, they had, with Kenneth Schermerhorn, a music director for a very long time, who very suddenly and very unexpectedly passed away last April of 2005. And their new concert hall, which is named after Kenneth Schermerhorn, was scheduled to open up in the beginning of their 2006-2007 season. He was supposed to conduct at least the first season there, and they were going to gradually look for a new music director. So that's one bit of not conflict, but it's definitely a bit of strife that's thrown into the organization, because they have all the regular pressures involved with building a giant building that they're not just going to be the main tenants in, they own the building, meaning they run it, they're responsible for making a profit. That's that doubles, or if not more, the size of their administration. And on top of that, now they have to go about finding a music director as well.
I read in New Music Box, Frank O'Terry's column, he was talking just recently about their repertoire. There was a very interesting playback on that, and what be interesting, I don't want to go too deeply here on Nashville, but it'll be very interesting to see, their repertoire has been fairly imaginative, and it'll be interesting to see now that they're moving into a hall that's going to require them to generate more revenue.
Sure.
How the repertoire will be affected.
That, and of course, then that also just circles back to all the issues of governance and how musicians and managers will work together, because they'll have to decide how they want to create a formula to determine which repertoire they're going to play, and how they're going to evaluate how well that does, or how much impact it does or doesn't have. And to the best of my knowledge, they use no extraordinary system of being able to determine that right now. That's outside the ordinary. And whether or not they decide to go that direction will be very interesting to find out,
I've noticed a significant change in philanthropy over the last, I would say, now 15 to 20 years from, and I'm generalizing, so apologies for that, but moving from a philanthropy that was, that came out of the early part of the 20th century, I believe, which was the grand gesture philanthropy, to what I call donor-driven philanthropy, where donors have very specific ideas about how they want their, and from your response here, you know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
How do you see this impacting American orchestras?
It will.
Clearly.
There simply isn't any way around it. I don't think the American orchestra model, regardless of what model they use, a 501c3 or they step out of it, or the governance, all of those things are still going to be impacted solely by the amount of money they receive and how the people giving the money want it being spent. You'll never change that attitude. You can do your best to help educate and help guide and help steer, but you'll never change it. I'm of a mind, typically from a management point of view, that instead of trying to fight that, work with it. It's just one of the rules that you have to work in. Whether it hobbles you or it empowers you, you still have to work with that to get to the end goal that you're leading to. A good manager will always find a way to take restricted funds, which is what you're talking about, meaning single-use or limited-use funds, and be able to still apply that money or use that money to draw in other money to do other things that need to happen in the organization. Now, of course, there are a lot of good conversations we can have about that in different directions. But I simply think trying to move away from that would be a very bad thing for the business. They simply can't survive without those large donations, and I don't think ever will. Unless the government steps in, but I'm not going to hold my breath either.
Don't hold your breath there. It's clear from reading your work and from talking to you that you're somebody who's very impassioned about the topic, your topic. You must wake up in the morning and want to do what you do. What's your motivation? What would you like to see as the result of your work?
Wonderful question. Someone actually mentioned to me the other day that they thought I was very passionate about what I wrote about, and I asked them if that meant they thought I was a pain in the neck, and they agreed. Motivation is to simply want to see the business do even better and not squander the artistic output that is currently in place, because I think it's quite possible to lose that. I think everything runs in cycles, and what I would like to see not happen in this business is the level of artistic output take a very strong nosedive because the financial aspect takes a nosedive, because one will follow the other. You can't have this level of artistic product without the kind of financial support it has to have behind it. That's my largest concern. And without going into numerous other conversations about the issues involved with the managerial side of the business, one thing that I wanted to do when I started writing Adaptistration was to create a different type of public forum to discuss a lot of the issues within the managerial side of the business, which at least I felt personally did not always get the amount of attention it should receive. It's a very collegial business, and that has a lot of positives to it, but at the same time, it could also use a little more self-evaluation. Of some very honest issues, and that, of course, happens for both sides, musicians and managers, but I write more about the management side.
About the management, yeah.
There are some good blogs that talk about the players, though.
It's true, and I read them as well. So I imply that management needs attention.
It does.
So,
a lot of attention.
So what should the music schools do? Because most of these managers have music degrees.
Quite a few of them do.
That's
actually an aspect that I'm seeing change more and more every year. The professionalization of orchestra management has grown exponentially in the last 10 years with arts administration degrees. And there's a very strong feeling that you simply don't have to have any kind of training as a professional musician or artist to be able to manage an arts group. And for the benefits that can come from